Welcome again to this EAAMO conference. Today we have the policy and practice panel about refugees and asylees. My name is Til Saure. I am actually now connecting from Lima, Peru. And it's a pleasure to have you all here. And we are gonna learn from a diverse group of practitioners who have experience working with refugees and asylees. And actually today also it's a special day to talk about refugees and asylees since the Nobel Prize in Literature was awarded to the novelist Abdul Razak Gurnah, who is a Tanzanian national, and actually he is a refugee himself in England, and most of his literature also talk about the effects of colonialism and the fate of the refugee. So I think it's a nice day also to talk about and to know more about this awesome topic. Myself, I declare myself not to know much about the topic, so I will also try to learn a lot from our four guests. And before we start, I would like to have maybe some context of what is the problem about the refugees and asylees. And according to the UN Refugee Agency, at least 82.4 million people around the world have been forced to flee their homes. And this, of course, as a result of conflict, violence, human rights violations, and persecution. Among them, like almost 25% of these peoples are refugees, and half of these peoples are under the age of 18. So lots of young people there. So let me introduce our guests. So we have Yukai Kaidea. Yukai is a junior researcher at the Institute of Life Course Health Research in Stellenbosch University. Sorry for my broken English. She's also center manager at the Institute's Massively Sound Research Center, and she worked for almost a decade at senior management level at the Trauma Center for Survivors of Torture and Violence. Part of her responsibilities included providing psychosocial support to refugees and asylum seekers. Yukai graduated from University of Cape Town and holds a master's degree in social sciences and clinical social work practice. Welcome, Yukai. We also have, hey, we also have Paulina Vera. Paulina supervises the, Paulina supervises the George Washington Law Immigration Clinic students and provides legal representation to asylum seekers and respondents facing deportation in immigration court. She is also a professorial lecturer in law and has previously taught immigration law. Well, Paulina previously served as the only immigration staff attorney at the Maryland-based nonprofit CASA. And well, she had lots of experience about dealing with clients that have these problems with deportation. And well, she graduated from George Washington University Law School, where also she got a bachelor in international studies. She's originally from Tucson, Arizona, and she's a proud daughter of 2 immigrants. Hello, Paulina. We also have Richard Thigpenny. He's Chief Innovation Officer at the Asylees Community and Housing, ACH, where he leads the organization's research and consultancy work alongside the Rethinking Refugee agenda. He has been working with refugee communities since 2004, leading the development of innovative integration services that create opportunities for individuals to lead independent and ambitious lives in the UK. Richard leads the ACH campaign to create systemic change to redefine, recenter, and rebuild the integration process to end the cycle of poverty of newly arrived communities. Welcome, Richard.
Welcome.
Also, we have Alicia Remp. Alicia joined the HIAS, which is the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, a senior director for resettlement and integration in 2019. HIAS is an institution that that helped for more than 100 years to refugees and to resettle them in safety, reuniting families who have been separated and helping them build new lives in safety and freedom. So hello, Alicia, how are you? I think she's there. Okay, so let's start from the basics. I think, although there are many people that may know the topic, I think there are some people like me that need some immigration law 101. So Paulina, are you there? How are you? Paulina, I was wondering if you can explain us from the legal perspective, what is the difference between a refugee and asylee in terms of legal protection?
Sure. So both refugees and asylees into the United States, right? Because I practice in Washington, D.C., and I represent immigrants from D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. Under our system, refugees and asylees are essentially the same, just the key difference is where they're applying for protection from. And so refugees are seeking protection, but doing most of their process from outside of the United States, whereas asylees, who I mainly represent, are doing the process from inside of the United States. But both of these categories of folks are fleeing something, right? They are scared to return to their country. And so the definition that we have under our domestic law here in the United States that was adopted from international law is that the person faced persecution in the past, or they have a well-founded fear of future persecution. And that persecution is tied to or on account of one of the 5 protected grounds. So that's race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. So the membership in a particular social group is kind of an amorphous category. There's no definition of what constitutes a particular social group in our Immigration Nationality Act, which is the fundamental base of our immigration law here in the United States. So much of what we know about that does come from case law. So cases that come from the Supreme Court, circuit courts, or the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is an appellate court that we have in our immigration system. And so that can constitute things like gender. As you might have noticed, gender was not listed in the protected grounds. That might constitute folks, members of the LGBTQ community. We've had clients who have suffered from various mental illnesses. We right now have a client who is paranoid schizophrenic. And so we are advancing her asylum claim under the particular social group. So both categories of folks, refugees and asylees, are fearing something back in their home country, again, on account of one of these things. The key difference being where they're applying for protection and also which agencies they're going to interact with as well. So like I said, I'll speak more so to the asylee context because that's really what I work on. But in the United States, some folks go through what's called the affirmative process of asylum. So they have an interview with an officer from our immigration agency, USCIS. And that's a non-adversarial setting. We have an asylum office right here in Arlington, Virginia, and the asylum applicant will have an interview. If they're successful, wonderful, they get asylum. They're not successful, then they move to the defensive posture, which is in front of the immigration judge. Or some folks think, the people coming in from the southern border, they may start in front of the immigration judge. And so that's a defensive posture. That is, there is a government attorney who's seeking to deport the person in proceedings. There's an immigration judge. There's the asylum applicant themselves, and if they're lucky, because our system does not provide for counsel to be appointed, they may have an attorney that represents them as well. And so that's really, I do both the affirmative process and the defensive process. And so I'm happy to talk about more of what that looks like on a day-to-day basis, but that's generally the difference between the two.
Well, thank you very much. And what are the main challenges your clients face when they are facing deportation?
Sure. So there's a lot of things, right? First of all, the system is intentionally made to be very confusing. And so there's a lot of different requirements that have to be met. I kind of just gave a broad overview of what asylum is, but each of those words that I just said, persecution, well-founded fear, on account of, political opinion, et cetera, those all have their own legal definitions that have to be met. And so it's a lot of, it's very complicated, right, to navigate the system. And the way to put forth the best defense, right, is with evidence, but that can be tricky as well, right? Because a person's testimony alone should be sufficient. However, with many adjudicators, unfortunately, we see that they want more. They want evidence to corroborate what they're saying, but people are fleeing their country, right? So they might not think, oh, let me bring the note that the gang member wrote to me to threaten my life. They don't think to bring these things necessarily. And so we do have a challenge in trying to get evidence sometimes. That might mean reaching out to someone in home country, getting people to write letters if they have knowledge of what happened. But obviously, right, that can be difficult to like get the originals here to make that happen. Maybe people don't have knowledge. So evidence, I would say, is one thing that's very difficult. Something else that's difficult is the long processing times. So right now I have clients that we submitted their asylum applications to the asylum office in 2017. They still have not had an interview. Wow. So they have been waiting that time. And that's not even the worst. In our immigration court system in the United States, we are over 1 million cases in deportation proceedings nationwide. And so right now, it's very common for people to not even have hearings until I think my latest client is scheduled in 2024. So we're getting into 2024, 2025. I actually have a client whose hearing's finally going to be this December. She's been in proceedings since 2013 and has not had a hearing for her asylum case. So the very long wait times put people in a limbo process. That causes them a lot of, rightfully so, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, while they have to think about what the decision might be on their case and if they're going to be able to obtain protection here in the United States. And also, right, life happens during that time. People get jobs here, they study, they have kids who are then US citizens, and they have mixed status families. They might get married. And so their life goes on, right? But they're just waiting and waiting and waiting until they are finally able to get that decision. So that's also very challenging as well. And it's unfortunate, right? Because my clients often call me and ask for updates, and often the update is there is no update. We just have to wait. And that's a huge failing of our system. So I would say those are there are plenty. I could talk for hours about the challenges asylum seekers face, but I think those are two of some of the biggest ones that we see.
So you mentioned that there are these huge time that they have to wait, just wait. So I was wondering, is this just because there is a lot of bureaucracy involved in this, or it's just about the numbers that you get for, I don't know, to process all filings?
I would say it's a number of things. Definitely the system is overburdened. There is just not enough resources dedicated to the adjudication side of things. Plenty of funding from Congress does go to the enforcement side of things. And so that's one thing, right? We just flat out need more resources, more adjudicators in the court system, more clerks, more things like that, right? That can help with the processing of cases. But even beyond that, it's just like, I would say it's an over eagerness to place people in proceedings to begin with, right? I think that there's a lot to be said for like this concept called prosecutorial discretion, right? In the criminal context in the United States, prosecutors can decide, we're just not even going to put folks in the system to begin with. And that's because we're balancing the resources that we have. Well, we have a similar concept in the immigration court system. And because our system is so politicized, and a lot of the agencies are under the executive branch, i.e. the president is the top, we often see we sort of see prosecutorial discretion go like this. Like in the last administration, it really was not a thing. Now it's being brought back under the Biden administration. But that's something else too, is even what decisions are we making about who should be in proceedings, and should we be placing so many people in proceedings to begin with? And so because of that, our system is really overburdened at the moment. And that's why we're seeing these tremendous backlogs. And that extends for not even just the asylum. We're talking about asylum today, but that extends to family-based petitions, U visas, which I also do, which are for victims of crimes here in the United States. And some of those are subject to numerical caps in a way that asylum is not, but still there's something to be said, right, about across the board, we see tremendous backlogs in our immigration system.
Okay. And what are the criteria, if any, that determine whether an asylum seeker in an adversarial setting is granted legal counsel?
Sorry, I'm not sure I quite understand your question. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, so I was wondering if there is what kind of criteria do you have to determine whether an asylee is granted legal counsel?
Sure. So you mean what determines if I take on a case or not?
Yes.
Okay. So, a number of things. Like I said, I laid out some of the requirements, right? To how to have a successful asylum claim. And so when I do a consultation, I'm really just hearing their story first and foremost, right? I ask, are you afraid to go back to your country and why? And I let people tell me. Right. And then I ask follow-up questions and I start to see, right, okay, what happened to them in their home country? Does that rise to the level of persecution via the legal definitions that we have? I talk to them about types of evidence that they may have. And it's also a sense of credibility is a huge thing in our system. Adjudicator can find someone credible or not credible, and to be found not credible is very, very hard to overturn. It makes it really difficult for someone to continue with their case. And so it's also it's from experience, right? Getting a sense of the credibility of someone's case. If there's inconsistencies in their story, can those be explained? Why are there inconsistencies, right? Is it because they face trauma? And a lot of people with, I'm not a doctor and I have no medical background, right? But a lot of people that have this past trauma do manifest it in that they forget things. They may be inconsistent in their story. Things might not be lining up. And so, right, sort of seeing does that make sense? And then just seeing if they meet some of the procedural elements too. For example, in the United States, you have to apply for asylum within 1 year of arriving to the United States. There are some exceptions to that rule. But seeing if someone even that's passes that first hurdle, right? Or if there's a way to argue why that did not happen. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. And I'm thankful here at the law school that we're able to provide those services on a pro bono basis. That's another thing is, a lot of these pro bono legal organizations, nonprofits are really overburdened as well, just because of the sheer numbers of people seeking relief. And so it makes me happy that the cases that we are able to take on, we also are backed by the law school and able to dedicate the resources that we need to hopefully have a successful asylum claim. So I hope that answers your question.
Great. Yes, thank you, Paulina. And actually, you were talking about some important issue here that has to be with trauma. And we have Yukai here that works in a trauma center. So Yukai, I suppose that this happens, but what are some challenges refugees and asylees face integrating in South Africa? And I was wondering also what kind of, I don't know, from your perspective, how difficult it is for refugees that you work with to integrate in the society in South Africa?
Thank you so much, Chelsea. You're actually spot on. So just to give some background info, the way a refugee comes into South Africa, when they get to the point of entry, they are interviewed. And then unlike other African countries whereby there's a refugee camp where the refugees are taken and then they are taught the local language and taught how to earn an income, when refugees come into South Africa, they apply for asylum. So they're called asylum seekers. So once they apply for asylum seeker permit, they are then expected to live with family or friends. If they don't have any family or friends in South Africa, they're then referred to UNHCR or any of the local NGOs for them to find shelter. But then the expectation is now put on them to settle by themselves. So that then speaks to the integration. So they find it very difficult for them to integrate into the communities because number one, they don't know the language. Number two, when they have an asylum seeker permit, it's short term. So sometimes it's for 4 to 6 months and there's no employer who would want to employ someone who can't speak the language or who only has a short term permit. So it's very difficult for them to find employment. And then the community itself, like the locals, already it's an communities that are struggling with poverty. So now you've got foreign nationals who are coming into your society and you already have very few resources and they also need the resources themselves. So in South Africa, we really struggle with xenophobic attacks. I think the main ones was in 2008, 2015, and 2018. And what would result in that is that they would get thrown out of their homes, lose whatever property that they would have bought. And most of them would then have to seek refuge at the police stations. So at the trauma center, we would now work with the refugees that would come to us needing counseling. So what we normally would do is a background assessment for us to learn, okay, what's your background? Most of the refugees in South Africa, they are from Congo, Burundi, Somalia. So you do the background check, you hear the stories that they've gone through. And as a counselor, your first thing is how can I help them to deal with the trauma? But what you realize is that they only speak about their trauma for the first session when you're doing the background check. For the second session, and sometimes you see refugees for up to 20 sessions, it's always about the safety and their needs for shelter, food, accommodation, or us being able to provide them with protection because they're not safe in their communities. So it's very difficult as people who are providing psychosocial support because most of the time you end up then working with law firms like what Paulina was saying now, whereby you now need to look for ways of providing protection, ways of ensuring that they get medical help, and also just that them getting the basic needs like employment. But it's very, very difficult if they are on an asylum seeker permit. And just like what Paulina was explaining, it's the same in South Africa that you find someone on an asylum seeker permit for more than 10 years. And if you're on an asylum seeker permit, you have to go back to the entry point for you to renew your permit. So let's say you came through one of our border posts in Limpopo, which is maybe 3,000 kilometers away from where you are staying. Every 6 months, you have to return back to renew your permit. And if you're not working, that's very difficult. So you end up having refugees that are undocumented. And if you are undocumented, it's very difficult for you to get help. So I think those are some of the challenges that are there.
I see. And at the trauma center, you must have encountered some incredible people. Is there a story that stands out that you would like to share?
Yes, there is one, but again, I will try to generalize this as much as possible because of confidentiality issues. But I think it was in 2017, I was called out and I was being told that there is a refugee was in distress in the reception area. So I went, I met with a long story short, the asylum seeker permit had been cancelled because she didn't qualify for her refugee status. So when we then sat down with her and we went to a law firm with the lawyer, what we found out was that when she was interviewed by a male interviewer, and number two, the interpreter didn't really explain the questions properly. And what she had experienced was sexual violence in a country of origin. So when she was now being asked all these questions in a language that she wasn't really comfortable with, and by a male interviewer, she didn't speak up about the sexual violence. And because of that, she ended up not sharing her story. And the story that she shared, which was not true, didn't meet the criteria for her to become a refugee. So she was now told that her application was unsuccessful and she had to return back to a country of origin. So when she came to us, was in distress because she couldn't go back to a country of origin due to the violence that she had experienced. So what we had to do was to provide her with psychosocial support, but also work in collaboration with the law firm. A year later, we were able to get her back into the asylum seeker role. And then after a while, she did get a refugee status. And I think in 2019, she fell pregnant. She had twins. One of the twins, she named her after me. And then the other twin, she named her after the lawyer as a way of saying thank you. So those are some of the stories. The other one, sorry, I'll just share through the other one that comes to mind. I was called out because there was a refugee who was refusing to go and get help at the hospital. So I went and spoke to the refugee. And when he found out that I was not a South African, I was a Zimbabwean, he was more at ease to speak to me. So we spoke and he agreed to go to hospital. The reason why she was refusing to go with a South African national was because of the xenophobic attacks that he was experiencing in the communities where he lived. When we got to the hospital and he realized that he needed to be admitted, he got so angry that he wanted to attack me. If it wasn't for my colleague, I would have been attacked. Wow. And that also goes to show some of the mental health challenges that the refugees end up facing because of what they're going through. Sorry.
Thank you, Yuka, for sharing that. It seems that there are a lot of barriers, not only language, but also cultural barriers that may prevent people to get the help they need. As you mentioned, and Paulina, and you mentioned one of the main problems that refugees have is that they lack of opportunities for employment, for example, due to all this processing time that they have. And we have here Richard and Alicia that works in institutions that actually aim to help people to resettle and to and maybe to be introduced into the labor market in the communities. So Richard, what would you say are the characteristics of an ideal community for integrating refugees?
This is quite an interesting question because it sort of starts to classify refugees as a homogenous, just a oneness. So with ACH, we work with individuals from over 40 different countries of origin. And what we've been looking at is actually how we provide a very personalized support mechanism for each of those refugees and the needs that they present with. So in a city like Bristol, where I am, then there's, in the background, there's actual overemployment in the city. So there's actually a massive demand currently for individuals. And there's a reasonable amount of actual language training. The UK, despite all of the press in that, is reasonably prosperous. So the problem that we find is the fact that sometimes it can be too easy to get people into jobs, which is very good in the short term. So it meets the needs of individuals, especially if they've come through the asylum process where they've been sort of traumatized through that process. So they can easily move into employment on a type of work where you only need to have the language capability equivalent to about a 10 or 11-year-old's English person. But it's the next stage, and that's what we've been looking at, is with the work that we do every year, we work with close to 2,500 individuals. So over a 10-year span, that's about 25,000 people, which is the size of a small market town in the UK. And a small market town in the UK will have mixed employment offers. It will have everybody from unemployed through to doctors. So what we've been looking at is actually with the charter on the 1951 Charter on refugees should not be disadvantaged in relation to the native population. So where we have a native population that has a median salary of around about £26,000 per year, that's our target, whereas the prime driver in the system is for people to get any job, and our entry-level jobs in the UK are paid at a level that's 60% of the median salary, and in terms of Europe, that's classified as poverty. Mm-hmm. So the work that we've been looking at, and the actual what drives the way we work, is how do we ensure that those that we work with are able to not just move straight into poverty and achieve an employment goal, but are able to progress up to that median salary. So we've used, in terms of the community, what we've been looking at is the fact that there's always going to be a shortage of those there to provide language training or the necessary support for that development. So we've invested quite a bit of time into the technology to work with that. So we've been working with a French partner around an AI chatbot, which replicates the social networks that you would hope to have if you were going into a job such as a computer-based or digital-based employment. We've been looking at gamification approaches so that actually the people that we're working with can be self-sufficient in their integration rather than being dependent all of the time on agencies. So that gamification approach is looking at how they can acquire sort of civilians and community information and actually establish within the cities themselves. Mm. We've also been looking at sort of how we work and secure the data to evidence change so that we can actually work in more broadly with a wider group of organizations.
Sure. And Richard, how long it would take to a refugee to be employed to something that it's, matches his or her skills in the UK?
Follow the traditional humanitarian approach. It's very likely to be never, unless you're picked up by a group that's got a specific interest and a specific set of links. There's been a big move over recent years to develop employment pathways into the likes of the NHS. So the inhibiting factor is the level of English a lot of the time. So in terms of state funding, the level of English that you can acquire free at source is a level 2, which is a sort of medium grade for a 16-year-old. Your career type jobs in the civil service require the sort of skill set that you would get, say, as an 18-year-old individual. So again, that increased vocabulary, and then to go on to those main trades, you're looking at, again, that sort of degree level English. So the route way using the traditional free English in the UK could take between 5 and 10 years to get to the level of the 16-year-olds. So one of the things that we're advocating very much for is developing the digital skills to access English language training online and work it that way, because the resources there will allow a much faster route way. So that's especially if you're working with individuals who've come from rural backgrounds where they've only had primary education, you've got the start points quite low. Where we're working, say, with an Iranian professor who's fled because of persecution, the level of English and the level of resilience could be a lot greater, whether they choose to go back to original careers. Another thing, because of the persecution itself and family links. So where somebody's already at that professional level, it's much quicker. And what's required then more is around building the networks that allow them to get access to the opportunities, and that will depend city by city.
Sure. That's pretty important. Alicia, I was wondering how would be the things in the US in terms of characteristics of a community for integrating refugees in an easy way, and also about employment opportunities. Is it very hard, and how HIAS is helping them?
So I think it'll be helpful to provide some background. So HIAS works in 18 different locations. And so at the start of this, we're making decisions about where people should be resettled within our network. So to one of the questions there, we use an algorithm for placement optimization. It's called Annie. It's a tool, and we use it as a decision support tool. So we can always override the recommendation, having perhaps more information about a site, but it helps us first and foremost place optimally. And then and these are, just to make the distinction between what Paulina was speaking about, these are refugees with status, so are coming in with some benefits attached to their journey. So when refugees end up at the sites, there's a whole set of services that start to come into play. And as Richard talked about, the one thing about refugees is there's a huge variety in who you're serving, and not only their English language capacity, but what their home language is, education levels, and so on. And so there's so much tailoring that goes on to support refugees. And the research is good. In terms of labor force participation, wage rates increasing over time. But I know we could shorten the journey to integration by years and years if we did things better and more tailored to the needs of clients. So know that in the US, because the stipends are so low from the federal government, people have to go into survival jobs. And at 90 days, for example, about 45% of clients are working. So just like huge, fast entrance into life in the US. But what that does is it cuts off continued learning. And so oftentimes they're working not just one job, but two jobs. And so the time they have to dedicate to learning English and skilling up is really minimal. So that's kind of one major effort that we're undertaking, is the career pathways idea. And we've spent a lot of time this past year focusing on digital literacy skills and how to support clients' kind of baseline foundational skills that are so important for every job and for navigating communities. And then additionally, trying to be creative about English language instruction. It's a really outdated model here in the US. It requires you to attend classes in person and not the right selection of classes. So really trying to go to some more online opportunities and more tailored to the needs of clients. So that's, Richard, at another time, I'd like to follow up with you on your project you described.
Yeah, it'd be good to do that.
Yeah, but you know how it works community by community is really, it's a local effort. So you have a, you know, clients might be going to Nebraska or they might be going to Philadelphia, you know, just really different locations, and who's involved at those locations has depended on what that local implementing partner can pull together on behalf of those clients. Many have really significant volunteer communities because it's hard to do this without it. So all those people that are volunteering are mentoring clients for unemployment, for example, how to find their faith community, for example, how to navigate public schools. So I think here in the United States, it's really a local endeavor, and it works better if there are more people involved. The system itself structurally is not supportive in enough ways. You know, we take really large numbers of refugees, right, in the United States. I mean, we are getting ready to resettle 55,000 Afghans in the next few weeks, like huge numbers. And so part of the reception and the integration is preparing communities for arriving refugees and making sure all the systems are aware so that the public school system doesn't go into a frenzy and the health system doesn't go into a frenzy. So there's a lot involved, could definitely be done better, but
how could we do better? How to improve things?
Yeah, such a good, hard question. I mean, all the way from the beginning of how it's structured, the resettlement system is structured in the United States, the president determines a ceiling number. If you get an inhospitable administration, you can get that number completely whacked back, which we've had over the last 4 years. And that just starts to dismantle the whole system because the payment funding stops. And now we're in this building back, arduous process of pulling all that infrastructure back together. So first and foremost, like the level of control the executive office has over the whole system is extraordinary and not advisable. And then I would say there's some good supports around trauma. So we run case management for people who have extra vulnerabilities, be they medical, mental health, at all of our sites. But we could really use more investment there. And we're coming up with creative models to, you know, we do more psychoeducational work. So there's the intensive trauma work, and then there's more lighter touch community leaders involved, you know, coming up with different models that will address everyone's needs. So that's probably a conversation.
Earlier you mentioned about this algorithm that you used in HIAS for resettlement, I suppose to match refugees' skills and also communities where they are gonna work. How is this working, and when did you start working with this algorithm?
Yeah, the conversation started with the university partners, I want to say in 2016, and then we launched in 2018. And Worcester Polytech is one lead on it, and Oxford University is another, and there's additional researchers involved. And it was, you know, years of conversation where the researchers were really kind of embedding themselves in our work to understand, because it's complicated stuff, right? So it took a level of investment on their part to really understand it. And then since 2018, we've been using it. Now our resettlement numbers were pretty thin over the last 2 years, but now we're kind of gearing up for many more arrivals. So it'll come into use much more, but it kind of gave us a testing period to work out some kinks and add some new features. And yeah, it's been great. And I think when our numbers do go back to sort of normal numbers, it'll be incredibly helpful, because otherwise humans are making all these decisions around what's an optimal placement. Does the site have language capacity for Congolese communities? And can the housing market, manage a family of 10, and all that other stuff that goes into factoring where to place people now has more of a algorithm attached to it. Yeah.
And I was wondering, maybe this question for all of you, which other areas do you think the research community that works with algorithms and optimization problems could help towards the well-being of the refugees and asylees? I don't know if maybe Richard?
It can help in a number of ways, because as Alicia's saying, it's around actually optimizing what's going on. So algorithms and various tech can actually help to drive improvements in the quality, because you're working with people's lives and helping people re-establish. And so the pandemic has shown us that classroom based, bricks and mortar based approaches aren't always the best. There needs to be like a flexible, dynamic set of provision. So where the algorithms that can look at is as much as anything helping the agencies working with refugees make better informed decisions, because I can pull in so much more big data and turn it into answers, rather than relying on an individual who might know somebody to develop a future.
Awesome. Someone else? Thank you, Richard.
I mean, one thing I've thought about is in the United States, there are definitely resources, and oftentimes refugees don't or can't access them. And so, for example, there's a whole Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act for workforce training. And there are established training programs for those who are harder to employ. But because of language gaps and because of sort of cultural misunderstandings, refugees don't always avail themselves to the resources that are there. There's like a disconnect that happens. And in our work, we have a lot of case managers that are doing that bridging. But it seems like there should be a better solution to getting to those resources. And I don't know what it is exactly, and if it has some really elegant solution. That's my fantasy is, it's a very labor intensive line of work we're in. And like has been said, it kind of relies on the super fantastic case manager locally that does all this connecting. And I wish there was sort of a more efficient, labor-intensive way to access resources that are there.
And talking about labor problems, do you see maybe some potential reform or policy that in the labor market that may help to refugees to get jobs easily? Maybe there are some restrictions or something. I don't know. I ask that because here in, for example, in Peru, we're actually the second country that are welcoming Venezuelans that are, leaving their countries, and Colombia is the first country that they're welcoming Venezuelans. And one of the things that we're working here was trying to help in the harmonization of degrees, for example, and help to speed up the process to you validate your degrees. I don't know if you have such benefit or such a policy there in UK and in US. So maybe we can start with Richard.
With the degrees and things like that, they can be validated, but majority of refugees that we work with, probably 96% haven't got the degrees or those professional things. So we've got like interesting points at the moment where we've got like a massive shortage of drivers, and we've got whole populations who haven't got the English language levels to secure the license to get those jobs. So there's a need for like mechanisms that actually facilitate access into high demand jobs, as much as there is for those with the degrees, because when they're going to go into a winter with possibly 45,000 too few care workers.
I see.
Things like that.
So I suppose the policies that you may need are more in the area of skill them up, right? Training them, I don't know, give them some knowledge to then work in something.
Yeah, so for us, it's looking at how we can actually fast track that process into the labour shortages that there are, and at the moment there is now starting to become a move towards better facilities, but there's also in the background there's a hostile environment to refugees as well. So if we start providing too much for refugees, there'll be a backlash because the white working class also need it. So there's for all of our desires and wants to create a better system that makes real good use of like a superb set of individuals. There's another set of people go, we don't want them here, that they're others, they're foreign, and let's hold them back, sort of thing.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Alicia, would you like to share something about it?
Yeah, know that HIAS actually works in Latin America and has been resettling Venezuelans in neighboring countries for quite a while. So yeah, we're over there as well. In the US, I would say same idea, that I'm less concerned with the people that come in skilled. There are services that translate diplomas and find them and support skilled laborers. So I think it is the majority that fall outside of that category that, you know, we work hard on trying to find solutions for. So I think the skilling up in an efficient way is what's top of mind, and we're trying different things. I think the other thing that we've been doing is, as we get approached by corporations, and we get approached a lot because people want employees, you know, really trying to negotiate hard about, well, what can you give them? I mean, what kind of training programs can you put on site in a facility that helps them, you know, skill up? So, you know, in this labor market, we have some leverage to do that now. But really trying to figure out, both from government sources, the private sector, how to support clients more adequately.
Awesome, thank you. Paulina, going backward in the process, right? Because now we are talking about labor and resettlement, and going to the decision of deportation. Do you see any impact from the use of algorithms and AI in law for deportation cases?
No, so as I put in the chat, when Francisco asked, there's not like an algorithm that's used to generate a decision. Our system is very people-based, and that person is the adjudicator, whether it be an officer from USCIS or an immigration judge, or then even higher at the appellate courts. Like I said, the Supreme Court has put a number on showing future persecution. They said it's about 10%, but because our system is so adjudicator based, that's another issue that we have with our system in the United States, is that there's tremendous variation from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I practice both in the Arlington Immigration Court and the Baltimore Immigration Court. So there may be a difference in the number of asylum grants from that court to that court, and it's maybe not even like an hour drive. And then even within one immigration court, there may be a ton of variation as well. We used to have pretty high grant rates in the Arlington Immigration Court, but unfortunately, with some of the more recent appointees, we're seeing some immigration judges have very, very low grant rates. In fact, one immigration judge who was appointed under the last administration has been on the bench since June of 2020, and since then has only granted one asylum case. So you see a tremendous amount of variation across the system, and maybe that's because there isn't any sort of system in place. I will say the other one system that was a negative factor that was implemented under the last administration was that they were tracking judges' decisions to see that they were going through a certain number of cases per year, and also to see like how many grants. And I've heard of immigration judges being reprimanded for granting too many cases. And also the amount of cases that they heard in a year could also determine future raises, future promotions, things like that as well. And that really, for me, that's for me showing like an algorithm or a system being used in a harmful way, because to put that kind of pressure on an immigration judge that you have to hear a set number of cases in a year really calls into question due process, because not every case is going to require the same amount of time, but some are going to require more time, more care, more research to be done on the legal issues. And each person should be entitled to an independent evaluation of their cases and not feel the pressures right from their higher ups to have to make a decision in a very fast, rushed manner. And so I'll say that. I will just add one note to like a previous question. I don't know an exact place to like, you know, where algorithms would be like helpful in the kind of work that I do, but I will just say like a note for researchers. I would just like to, I guess, caution you or ask that like the human element always be there, right? Because I think Richard said this, but asylees and asylum seekers aren't like the same. Like they're going to be different culturally, like what their backgrounds are. And I think that there's this idea that we kind of lump everyone in together. And I represent folks from 30 countries around the world currently, and they all have different things going on. Unfortunately, because our system here in the United States is so politicized, I think a lot of times people control the narrative in a negative way and villainize asylum seekers by sort of lumping people into these huge groups. Like we hear rhetoric like, there's swarms of people or hordes of people coming in and these huge groups and stuff like that. And I think that a way to combat that, right, is to put more of a human element and to talk about the individual stories. What are the motivating factors for people having to make this migration, right?
Sure.
A lot of it is, and I always tell people, think about it like if you were in that situation. I'm not married, I do not have children, but you know, if a gang member was threatening the life of my child, I can imagine that I would probably do everything in my power to protect my child and get them to safety. And so I think that we need to be talking more about the stories and the reasons why people are doing this. And many of my clients even say to me, I never imagined I would be in the United States. I never wanted, it was never my intention to go to the United States. I had a happy life here. I love my country, but I had to, for safety, I had to flee. And so I guess when you're all doing your research, I would just ask, right, that there be that human element present.
Thank you, Paulina. So we are already 1 minute ahead. Alicia, there is a question for you here in the chat box. I will just read it and please ask you maybe to answer to the person offline, if that would be fine. Yeah. So the question was about how you have been assessing the performance of the matching algorithm for refugees and localities in the theme of bridging policy and practice, where there are any discrepancies in terms of what academics prioritize versus what individuals such as yourself in the field prioritize for algorithm success. I think it's a...
Yes, I did see that. But actually, I'm so sorry, but I have a 1:15, so I have to drop off. And I'll connect with
Francisco and to answer to him. I totally understand. Thank you very much for you. And I think it was a very, very nice conversation. I learned a lot from you, and I'm sure the audience also learned a lot and have more questions about it. Thank you for your time. And I think I have to close the session now.